You have been involved along your career, along your time in all these open source projects. Why are you doing this?
Because I use proprietary tools for many years, and I've been bitten so many times by you do all this work in this tool, and then they stop developing it, and the program bit rots, and eventually you have to stop using it because it either doesn't work on your computer.
Hey friends, welcome back to BIMvoice. Today I have the pleasure to talk to Bruno Postle. For a very long time, I've been really looking forward to talk to, because he is a very important contributor to some open source projects. We will learn more about pretty soon. Hi Bruno, thank you very much for joining me.
Hi, good afternoon, Petru.
Okay, let's just start and please introduce yourself. Tell us a few words about yourself. I don't know too much about you, just that you are contributing a lot to Blender BIM and IFC OpenShell with some things. So,
my name is Bruno Postle. I'm an ex-architect, and I live in Sheffield in Yorkshire in the UK. So as I say, I was an ex-architect. I've worked for most of my career designing large tension fabric structures, and more recently I do the design and engineering for large sculptures. So this is my day job. I work for a company called Dialis in London. Sculptures, yes. The way it generally works is I work with an artist, and the artist comes up with the ideas, and we discuss what we can build and what's feasible, and I kind of put together the design and the project and make sure it's engineered properly.
That's interesting. That's very, very interesting. I was wondering, what did you left behind architecture for? So this is really interesting. It's interesting that actually this can be a career. Like there is enough work for you to do that. And that's really cool to hear.
Yeah, no, I'm always meeting people who are doing jobs that were not in the book that they gave you at school.
Okay. And that's all? That's everything you do?
So that's my day job. I'm also an open source software developer, and I've worked on a number of projects that are related to BIM and the building industry over the years. I mean, three main projects. I can go into them in detail, but one is Homemaker, which is a system for evolving the design of buildings, and something that's grown from that is now a Blender add-on called the Homemaker add-on, which you can use to very quickly design and detail BIM models. But you basically sketch out all the spaces, and it generates all the IFC for the walls and the windows and the doors and so on. And then very much depends on Blender BIM and IFC OpenShell. So I've been involved with both of those projects on and off since for the last couple of years, and in particular more recently, I've been working on the IFC Git panel in Blender BIM.
Yeah, we're privileged to witness last week. You posted this online, right?
Yes, yeah, that's on my YouTube channel.
Amazing achievement, yeah. And like I said, I still want to challenge you to think, how can we bring this to the masses?
Well, we have to bring Blender BIM to the masses is what we have to do.
So simple it is, right? And then, which is the third project?
Even though they're both called Homemaker, they're both very different projects. They produce buildings that look very similar, but one is a purely non-interactive evolutionary system. You give the computer your plot of land, and you tell them what latitude and longitude you've got and what surrounding buildings you've got, and it uses the daylight and the constraints that you give it to design a building.
Wow.
Possibly people would be familiar with Christopher Alexander's pattern languages. So it uses those pattern languages as a fitness criteria for the evolution.
How is it Homemaker, the standalone platform?
That's called Homemaker, yes. And it's entirely non-interactive. That's a server-side piece of software.
Is this something that people can buy?
No, it's open source. As far as I can tell, nobody's used it for designing any buildings, so it's very much an experimental project. But it turns out that actually you can design buildings using an evolutionary system like this.
Wow, that's interesting. Do you have any videos, any tutorials on how you can use it?
There should be some videos on my YouTube channel, I hope, and certainly on my Twitter profile. There's my pinned Twitter post is all about that Homemaker project.
That's interesting. Homemaker Blender add-on. You said that it uses Blender BIM and Topologic.
Yeah, the system for evolving buildings, and the end result was IFC files, and actually wrote my own IFC library in Perl in order to be able to generate IFC files, which because I was programming in Perl at the time, and I had no choice really if I wanted IFC files. When Blender BIM first appeared, that was great. I have a tool that I can use to look at these IFC files that I've been creating. That was very appealing, and I've been basically using Blender BIM ever since. But one of the things that Dion, who's the main programmer of Blender BIM, discovered was that he's using IFC OpenShell. IFC OpenShell is actually a very sophisticated library. Most people use it for basically for doing an import and export of an IFC file. So you have your proprietary BIM tool, and then you write a plugin with IFC OpenShell and you use it to write your IFC file or import or export an IFC file. But with IFC OpenShell, you can load an IFC file, you can make changes and write it back to disk. That's actually quite a special trick because actually it doesn't mess up the IFC file. Are the only things that change in the resulting file. So rewrote Blender BIM in order to be able to take advantage of this. So Blender BIM is now a native IFC editor. So you can load an IFC file, you can make changes, save it again, and the only things that have changed in the IFC file are the specific bits that you've modified. And that opens up all sorts of possibilities for extra things that we can do that you could never do before. So I'm running ahead of myself. So Blender BIM was looking very interesting. And then Topologic appeared. Now, Topologic is a library for doing topological geometry for the building industry, essentially. One of the very useful things it does is you can just throw a series of shapes at it. And if they enclose spaces that create cells, then it creates what's called a cell complex. And this then becomes a model that you can query. You have spaces, you have walls, you have floors. But each wall is, you can query it, you can ask it what cells, what spaces are connected each on either side. And I realized that with IFC OpenShell and with Topologic, I'll be able to take the tool from my older evolutionary design program. I could take that generates the IFC files and I could throw it away and I could replace it with Topologic and IFC OpenShell. Mm-hmm. And what's more, once I've done that, it would then be very easy to make it a Blender add-on so that you could just draw some geometry in Blender and generate an IFC file from that.
That's very interesting. But is this only for houses, or can you design also blocks or larger buildings?
Yeah, you can design larger buildings. If you look at the Homemaker add-on and download it, it comes with some default libraries, but they're all domestic. So they're all domestic windows and doors. And it's been how I've been experimenting with it. And that's because I can't do everything. That's what I've been doing. So no, it's perfectly capable of designing much larger buildings and much more complicated buildings.
Could it be modified or expanded to address other kind of constructions, like for infrastructure, for example?
Probably not, if only because Topologic's very orientated around spaces, and spaces are enclosed, and an enclosed space is a room. So take it away from being a thing that was mostly concerned with rooms, and the relationship between rooms would be quite tricky.
Okay, but how would you use the same principles that you developed without using Topologic? Wouldn't it be possible to ignore Topologic for this functionality and just use the other part?
Yes, you can do this. So I recently made some changes. So if you draw a shape that doesn't enclose a space, then it just it tries to guess what you're drawing, because obviously it's not clear whether you're drawing a floor or a roof or a wall. It tries to figure it out, and it'll give you that part. So it's quite an easy way of drawing. If you need to draw a whole load of walls, you can use the Homemaker add-on for doing that. And it all interoperates with Blender BIM. So if you're in the middle of a Blender BIM project, you can break out, use the Homemaker add-on, and then generate some stuff, and then edit it all in Blender BIM and carry on.
From your knowledge, are there any architects, I assume architects mostly, using it like in real life?
Not as far as I know, but maybe there are. It's certainly the case with Blender BIM is, as we know, there's maybe 3 or 4 architects using Blender BIM as their primary tool. But every now and then somebody pops up and they're doing something that actually you're using this for your professional work. You didn't tell us. It's all alpha software, but actually people are using these tools in real life. Maybe not all the time.
No, exactly. But there are aspects of each field maybe that can be completely done actually in Blender BIM, right? And we mentioned that we need to take this to more people. Like people need to understand this and learn this and try it and see what it can do. I think it's a bit more trickier in organizations. Maybe it's easier for solopreneurs or for people who are architects or engineers or I don't know, doesn't matter, whichever professionals who are working alone. Or maybe nerds who want to start using IFC Git because then you have a quite sweet and innovative workflow, right? But like you said, you need to be bold. We are still there, right? You need to be bold to dare this, but it is possible. As we seen, like IFC architect is not just some architect doing some using a tool. He's also started to teach people about this, about what he learned, right? Which is quite amazing. And if he can do that, like why you should not be able to do it if you are working on small projects especially and you don't collaborate with other people and so on, right?
Yeah. So the people who are using Blender BIM, they're generally not software developers. They're the architects who are interested in the open source nature of it and what you can do with this native IFC model. But what's very important is that I think to actually make it work, you have to be in contact with the community and you have to ask questions and you'll find bugs. And it's pointless sitting there with a bug stopping you from working. You need to contact the developers and say, hey, there's a bug. And if people realize that actually you're using this for your work, that it'll get fixed very quickly.
This is the magic of this community, OSR community, right? Because this is exactly what's happening. Just imagine for a bug in Revit, or not an important one, but a feature that things are not working as expected, right? Or in any other software. It takes time. It takes a lot of time. And this is the amazing part here. If people see, that's exactly what you said. Because if people see, the developers see that somebody is interested to use a feature, they will focus on trying to build that feature.
Yeah, and it's also very important, the way that people want to use the tool and how they're using it shapes the tool. You can sit there and you can say, well, I think people might want to use it like this for years on end and write code, but actually you need to have that direct contact with the users in order to make it the tool that users need.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, let me ask you something, the big question for today. You have been involved along your career, along your time in all these open source projects. Why are you doing this?
Because I used proprietary tools for many years and I've been bitten so many times by, you do all this work in this tool and then they stop developing it and the program bit rots and eventually you have to stop using it because it either doesn't work on your computer or there's some other reason, something that you needed to do that it just simply won't do. And I've been in the industry a long time now and none of the software that I used initially still exists. And then the software that I used after that doesn't exist anymore. With something like Blender BIM, there's a real possibility that it will carry on working and that the files you create will be usable forever because Blender BIM produces very well formed IFC files.
One more advantage is that this actually is IFC, it's an open standard supported by an organization, right? This is also something quite important, which focuses on cooperation, collaboration, and open standards, right? Trying to open the built environment, the way we work, which is very isolated and closed, right? And there are more to that. And Blender, it's in itself, right? For how many years it has been around? Wasn't it launched in 99 or something like that?
Yeah, so Blender's existed for quite a long time, and it was what happened was there was a kind of a make or break moment where it was a proprietary tool, and they decided, well, okay, if it's going to survive, it needs to be open source. So they crowdfunded the open sourcing it more than 20 years ago now, I think. I've been using it for about 20 years, and actually it's gone from strength. And Blender is now one of the standout successes of the open source software movement. It works very well. It's very fast. It's incredibly powerful. And if I'm doing 3D editing, I don't use SketchUp anymore. I use Blender.
Yeah, it's not as you need to use some time to learn it, but you can definitely do that and much more, because you can do much more things also, right? You can do video editing and animations and a lot of more things.
I mean, yes, if anything, it's too big. It's enormous. I've been using it for 20 years and there are whole parts of it that are just a mystery to me.
The sculpture feature, how often do you use it, by the way?
So yes, I'm using it for designing monumental sculptures. Yeah.
No, it's an amazing tool. So
And I have been. 2008, I did the first sculpture in Blender,
Wow.
which was 30 meters high.
And you replicated that in reality.
Yes, yeah. It was.
Wow, that's really impressive. So, because I've been thinking sometimes, I get this, why are we struggling to force a software that was not built to design buildings? Is it the right way, the right thing to do? But at the same time, you get always this evidence, right? Is this actually ever going to be a problem? Or it's actually something that we can live with?
What of attaching a BIM tool onto Blender? Yeah, so there are some drawbacks. I mean, one is that you have to use the Blender. You have to do it the Blender way. We don't have much choice about what kind of user interface we use. We have to use. Blender has these panels, and it has this particular way of scrolling interface and so on. So we have to use that. The other issue is that because Blender's there's so much to it, and we're only using a small part of it. It can be quite scary for new users. That actually, drawing buildings is actually pretty easy, really, compared to all the things that you can do in Blender.
Definitely.
I mean, the main technical drawback that I can think of is that it doesn't do circles; it does splines. That could be an issue for some people in some projects.
I don't think it is much we can do about that part.
I mean, actually there is, because we're using the IFC as the data store and not the Blender file as the data store. IFC can store circles, but it's just that on the screen, what you're seeing is it's being turned into segments.
Yes, you see more vertex.
With a bit of care, so for instance, if you're editing profiles, you can keep them as arcs in the IFC file.
But then when you do that circle, you need to do it the IFC way, not just like a cylinder. If you model a cylinder the Blender way, then if you export that will have more vertices, right?
Yeah, because you can take Blender objects and you can turn them into IFC objects. But yes, if you start with a Blender cylinder, that's an object that has 30 sides or 40 sides or 64 sides. It is never actually going to be a circle. But if you start with an IFC circle or an IFC cylinder, then you're fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the problem, like if you have one element, that's fine. But if you have a big model, then you will end up like that can add up, and the model becomes too big, right? And heavy to load and so on.
Yeah, sure.
So that could be a problem. I'm thinking about something. In my job as a BIM coordinator, I see some value in trying to design some building site assets. My goal right now, closest goal to use Blender BIM for, is to design site assets in IFC, like with Blender BIM, and to have it as an IFC file and to be able to merge it with my federated model. Is it possible to do that? So when I'm saying site assets, I'm thinking about containers, cars, excavators, and I don't know, any like ventilators, all kind of assets, which are very easy. That's very easy to model in Blender. But how do I make sure that actually I'm not making a bad IFC? How do I make sure that I make it? Is it possible to make it in the IFC way?
Yes. So the IFC way to do it is to make everything a type. An IFC type is like a block in AutoCAD or a family in Revit. So an IFC is perhaps limited in that a type is just a single object, or well, I mean, walls are typed and extrusions are typed, but a thing like a site cabin would be you would model a site cabin, and it would be a single object. It can have multiple materials, and so it can look like a site cabin. But then once you've saved it, you can add it to your library, and then you can insert it as many times as you like, and it doesn't bloat the file each time you use it.
Yeah, I definitely understand that part, but I don't want it just to be a box, because a box like an IFC, like, yeah, it's simple, like a simple wall. You just extrude it, it's clear, right? Yeah. It's easy. When you have like, a container, a typical container, it has that weird surface, right? If I want to model it exactly that way, if I model it in Blender and then I convert it into a type, because that's how I thought in the first place to do it, it will have a lot of those vertices that we've been talking about, right? That's my fear.
Yeah, so there'll be a lot of vertices, but one of the great things about Blender is because it is a mesh editor, is that you can use it for cleaning things up. It's a great tool for creating low poly models. So if you want to model a container or a site cabin and you want it to look like a site cabin but only have 30 polygons, then that's pretty straightforward in Blender. That's typical use case.
Okay, so I should not waste my time trying to model it the IFC way. I should model it in Blender, try to reduce it, to clean it as much as possible, and then to classify it as a type.
Yes, so I'd model it as a single object. I would make sure that it was a closed manifold, so it didn't have any holes in it. And then but you can give it multiple materials, so it doesn't all have to be the same material. And then when you save it, it's saved as a extrusion. It's saved as a BREP, BREP geometry in IFC.
Yes. Usually those are coming from Revit, are very big.
Yeah, so if you have lots of cylinders and things in Revit and then you export it as a BREP, it can get very large very quickly. But Blender's a great tool for doing low poly geometry.
Okay, that's amazing. Then that's what I will try. Something else, because there are already, like, many of these assets that I want to use, they are already out there. I can find models, but usually I don't find them like a Blender files, right? I find a lot of step files, for example. Step files, and they have like hundreds, if not thousands of small components, and they are not, like you said, one manifold. What was that called, without holes? They have holes, and they have many components, right?
Yeah.
Now I try to join all these parts. It's not working always. Most of the time it does not work because it has holes inside. I don't know how they are made, but sometimes they have there are spaces, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I was thinking, now I need to try to learn how to model from a 3D model to a one element model, because usually, like, I see a lot of tutorials. I'm not very expert in this. I'm not an expert by far on this, but I see that it's very easy, like, to take a picture and model it in Blender. Like, it's very simple to do that. Just to see like a surface and make like a box would be very, very easy to do it, right?
Yeah.
But I still did not get there to see how do I use a 3D model, an existing 3D model? How do I model based on that? My own separate. But now I think maybe I should link that blend file as a reference and just model however I manage.
Yes, you could link it as a reference, and then you could just draw a new object on top of it, and then delete the old, or unlink the original. It all depends on what kind of geometry you're getting. Sometimes you could just delete all the bolts and then clean it up, and you end up with a low poly model without too much work. Sometimes you just have to abandon the original model and you have to copy it.
Yeah, the problem is that they have so many details. It's crazy. They have so many details, like small nooks and crannies. It's crazy, but I'll find a solution. Like, now I know the way should do it. Thank you very much for your advice. I'll try to do that. I'm really looking forward to this. And once I figure this out, the next challenge is geolocation. Like, Dion, I'm really struggling with geolocation. Like, it's killing me. It's killing me.
Yeah, you definitely need to ask Dion, because I have no idea.
But everything at its time. So it's good. Where do we go from here with all these projects? What are your future plans? Like, are these projects like done? Are they perfect? Do you want to improve anything more on them, or do you want to start a new project, work on a new project?
No, nothing's ever finished. I mean, where I started with this all is with Christopher Alexander's pattern languages. It's one of these it's like a bit of theory of architecture that has never been pursued, that's been sidelined, and actually I think it has a lot of value. And one of the things I demonstrated with the evolutionary tool is actually you can use the pattern language to design buildings, and they're perfectly sane, quite nice buildings. They don't go crazy. So as a theory of architecture, it's actually a complete theory of architecture. As it turns out, people are not that interested in letting the computer design the building for them. They still want to be in charge. So the Homemaker add-on is very much an interactive tool where you're in charge and you control the shape of your building. Problem with that is it doesn't stop you designing awful buildings, because a lot of architects are not very good at designing good buildings, and some architects are very good at it. So what I want to do is I want to bring the pattern languages back into that tool. So I want to be able to give the user feedback while they're designing. So it uses this theory of architecture, this pattern language to tell you, oh, this room, the ceiling's too low, or there's not enough daylight here, or these rooms need to be connected better, that kind of feedback while you design. So that's a thing that I'd like to pursue in the Homemaker add-on for Blender. I mean, what's happened in the last year, of course, is that I've been diverted somewhat by this Git functionality in Blender.
Which is now considered, like, would you say that you still have to fix some stuff, or it's
I mean, there'll be bugs, but it basically works. And I think, and I would hope that the user interface gets a bit better as well. As I'm no expert in designing computer user interfaces, so if anyone has some better ideas, would like to come and fix that, it's open source software. You can do that. I mean, I haven't described. Would you like to talk about the Git functionality use it has?
Yes, definitely.
So I'm going back to this native IFC aspect of BlenderBIM. So BlenderBIM, because it uses IFC OpenShell, when you modify an IFC file and save it, only a small part of the file has changed. What that means is that we can look at earlier versions and compare them with current versions, and we can diff, which is a computer term. We can do a diff, and you can say, well, actually, these things have changed, and that's something very difficult to do. It's very difficult to do if you've been exporting IFC files from a proprietary BIM application. But with BlenderBIM, it's easy. It also means that we can put the files in Git, which is a revision control system that's been in existence for a few years for managing software. Mm-hmm. So when you write software, what you do is you have a whole load of text files. You edit the text files, and what generally happens these days is you put them in a revision control system, and every time you make significant changes, you checkpoint it and you save a revision. And what that means is that as you go, you can always tell who changed what, when it changed, and why it changed as well. So if you find a bug, you can always trace it back to who did it and why they were doing what they were doing. It's very important. With Git, it offers all sorts of other things. So you can share your repository. It's called a Git repository with other people. Other people can download, not just download your software, they can download the entire history as well. So they have an identical copy of the repository on their computer. But because it's distributed, what it allows is that somebody else can make changes to their repository, and they can do what's called a pull request, which is to say, here are some changes, would you like them? And as the maintainer of the software, I can accept them and I can merge them into my software. And what it allows is for software to fork and then merge, and then fork again and then merge back together. At the end of the process, everybody stays on track and everyone has the same set of files. With what I realized with this native IFC behavior of BlenderBIM is we can do the same thing with IFC files. So the BlenderBIM IFC panel, you can save your model, and you can keep saving it as you go, but you can always roll back to any earlier version. You can branch it, so you can play with design alternatives, and you can either abandon them, or if you like them, you can merge them back into the project, even if the project has moved on since you branched. And similarly, with if you use a Git forge like GitHub, you can share your files privately or publicly, whichever you like, and you can collaborate with other people who can modify the same model. I mean, you don't have to worry about locking your model while they work on it. You can carry on working on your model, and normally we can merge those changes back together.
Yes, so this is quite detailed. I think it would be easiest to just go to Bruno's YouTube channel and look at the demonstration presented and try it. It would be very fun to try it, and you will see, like, it's going to feel very good when you try that. Especially if you never used Git before. Yeah, I promise you, because it's something which feels that it's quite advanced, which is actually quite advanced, although the philosophy behind it might be quite simple. But
no, the philosophy behind it is very complicated, but millions of people use it every day, and by no means are they all software developers. They're quite often, web designers or anyone who has to handle a lot of files and data.
Every developer is using it nowadays. Yes. One last question regarding BlenderBIM. You've been following the project since its inception, right?
Yeah.
How do you feel its progress has been from 2019, was it? Something like that, to today. Do you see, what I try to ask you here is that if you see any acceleration now in the last year, let's say?
I think so. It is moving. I mean, for a long while, it was basically Dion's project. And it was only Dion was committing to BlenderBIM. But now there's several people committing and all the time. So there's changes all the time. I mean, there's still, I still wouldn't even say that there's one full-time developer worth of people working on it. So Despite that, it's moving very fast. For the time that it's been going, it's now pretty much, if you were determined and you were designing small buildings as an architect, absolutely you could use Blender BIM. You can use it for everything, as IFC Architect is doing.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of other things that I couldn't do any other way. So for instance, I quite often have to give steel fabrication details to a steel fabricator, and they're running Tekla, and they need a specific kind of IFC2X3 file. And with Blender BIM, I can do that. I can give them the exact data that they need. And I don't have any other way of doing that. Blender BIM is the only tool that I have in my toolbox for doing this.
Wait, I'm trying to understand this. You are exporting from Blender BIM to IFC2X3 that will be imported in Tekla, or?
Yes, yeah. So, well, I'm just editing a 2x3 file in Blender BIM.
Okay, so you get an original file from Tekla.
No, I because I'm doing design work, and I need to give I need to do some very strange geometry sometimes. Yeah, and so I draw that in Blender BIM, and as long as I'm saving it an IFC2X3, which Tekla can cope with, I can communicate directly with the steel fabricator.
But how do you do that, since Blender BIM, like usually you say it saves by default in IFC4, right?
Yeah, so you just start with the 2x3 file.
Ah, okay.
When you create a new IFC project in Blender BIM, you have a choice of whether to start a 2x3 or a 4 or I believe now you can do a 4 point whatever it is, 4.3, which I have no use for at the minute because I'm not doing any infrastructure work, which is the main.
I need it, and I need tunnels. I need tunnels too, so I can't wait for that. But yeah, okay. So that's very interesting. Like, you could not have used any others. That's amazing in itself, you know? That's really amazing.
So on a recent job, I had some tubes that all needed a profile cutting on the end, but the profile wasn't just the profile you get by slicing it with another tube or with a straight edge. It was an artistic shape. And actually getting that data to the steel fabricator, I had to use Blender BIM. That's
amazing. I'm really, really excited about this feature. Yes, we still need to put in a lot of effort to develop it, but we'll get there. If some people can use it, more people will be able to use it, and they just need to learn about it. And yeah, as you said, the drawbacks of using tools that, yeah, of course, we have some tools in our industry which have been for many years, but still they have their limitations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why not use something that you have no limitation? Maybe for some use cases.
If it doesn't do what you need it to do, then somebody will help you, or you can do it yourself, or you can pay somebody to do it. And that may be even cheaper than buying a new piece of software.
A license.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And have the possibility to save it in an open format, an open standard, which you might be able to open it in 100 years maybe without any problem.
It's quite possible, yeah. I mean, IFC is like a JPEG format, you know, it'll be around for a long time.
Yeah, we don't know which version will be in 2150, but most probably it will be all if we don't get something really revolutionary, which might happen. I don't know. Technology is evolving, but also IFC, it's evolving. I really like the roadmap for IFC 5. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's a very, very capable file format. Considering it's 30 years old, it's remarkable.
Yes. Well, Bruno, thank you very much for joining me. I learned a lot. I really enjoyed this chat. I'm really looking forward to our future interactions and discussions.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
If people would like to ask you something, would like to get in contact with you, how can they reach out to you?
They should go to osarch.org, which has a community forum, and they should ask questions there. And if I can't help, somebody else will.
You are also in the chat. That's a good point. You are also active, quite active, right? Maybe you are more active in the forums, but you are active in the chat also.
Yeah, I might do the chat as well. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Bruno.
Okay, thank you.